Hi everyone, it's Rob Watson, the module leader for TECH1002, and this is the third introduction and summary to the lecture number 3, obviously, for TECH1002 Social Media Innovation. And I've not changed the title on my my lecture notes. Innovation. There we go, changed it. This week we're going to talk about the idea of remediation, which is a kind of very taken for granted experience in our present kind of media saturated environment. And what we want to look at is, again, using the framework of a particularly influential band and group, artists from the 1970s. I want to look at, well, some of the precedents are a bit earlier than that, but they come together in the 1970s. So we want to look at the idea of kind of the relationship between mass culture, which was something that we introduced last week with talking about Andy Warhol, and the kind of whole relationship of using mass and consumer culture as a creative entity in its own right. So something that was seen as being disposable becomes something which is seen as having a kind of pop integrity, a pop celebrity, amongst a lot of disposable kind of forms of media. So we'll look at some examples. And one of the things that runs through this debate and discussion is the notion of cultural value. And what do we value, and how do we value things, and what are the kind of artifacts and the kind of arts and the kind of products of our culture that kind of stand the test of time. And I'll show you a clip from a program which was a kind of groundbreaking program in the 1960s called Civilization, which kind of sets up the whole kind of tradition of culture, architecture, painting, sculpture, drawing, those kind of Western art forms that were kind of high art, high culture. But then what we get is a kind of transformation into a kind of more popular form of culture. And this is tied with an anxiety about mass culture. So the opposite of high culture was often seen to be mass culture, which was anonymous and kind of people were drones and people churned out, kind of uniform, standardized products and experiences from a class of people who were unable to think for themselves. The kind of mass of people out there, the kind of massification of people. Then we kind of move on into the 1950s and 60s, and we start to see a change in the way that people think about popular culture as being something which is creative and inventive and has a value in its own right and has a virtue in its own right. It might not be an extensive value and virtue, but it should be read on its own terms and looked at it in its own terms. So one of the things that kind of shape this is the kind of the commercial, the coming of the globalized world. That Marshall McLuhan idea of the global village and how global products added to a sense of interconnectedness, not just physically, not just in terms of communications, but symbolically in terms of the products that we purchased and the songs that we heard and the music that we listened to and the visual representations and films and television programs that we watched as well. So a band that I want to look at this week in a little bit of detail is Roxy Music, who were kind of formed in the early 70s with Brian Ferry as the kind of main songwriter at the time, and they had a real range of hits. They were never kind of like the first number one wasn't until 1981 when they did a cover of John Lennon's Jealous Guy. But they were a band that sold, that were very influential again. But then again, they also had kind of top 10 hits and big selling albums as well. And they did that by kind of playing around with images and remixing images, things like glamour images. They kind of played a role. They kind of adopted a persona, which is something that we see, we see a lot these days with kind of Gorillaz, Lady Gaga, those kind of things where people are a performance in themselves and they're not the real person themselves. And it's interesting that you often hear people like Bono and Robbie Williams talk explicitly that their public persona is a performance, which is a personality that they adopt rather than them necessarily being the authentic image. So what this drew on was the the pop art tradition, so associated with Warhol and the factory in New York, but also some British pop art, and the kind of most famous is Richard Hamilton, who's famous for the collage in Every Dream Home, a Heartache, which kind of represents the modern desires of the consumer. And there's a really good clip that I'll show with J.G. Ballard, who's one of my kind of inspirational authors, who describes it in really fantastic terms, kind of makes it kind of really come alive. So it's this idea that, as we've said previously, the kind of foundations of the new media or the new media emerges on the foundations of the old media. So this is about taking things again and kind of reforming them and mixing them up and manipulating them and turning them into a different form. And the remediation process is really something that we take for granted now, because we kind of expect a sense of remix culture, a reversion culture. We echoes of media from the past, and the search for originality and the search for uniqueness is often kind of downplayed, because the endless repeatability of certain formulas, certainly if you look at superhero films, which kind of have endless regenerations of the same story, and the lack of imagination of investment in alternative stories, if you like. So again, we'll look at the kind of cultural impact of the whole kind of process of remediation, and we'll kind of see if we can. Again, I'll play quite a bit of music in this in this session. So we'll kind of look at what kind of is fused in this process. I think that's a good way to think about it. What are the separate elements that come together, which are then fused to form something new? So the lecture notes are up on the wiki already. That's at wiki.our.dmu.ac.uk. If you want to talk and discuss about the topics that we're covering in the lectures and the workshops, if you want to ask a question, the best place to do that is on the discourse forum, which you can download as an app for iPhone and Android if you wish, or you can access it online, and it's at talk.our.dmu.ac.uk. Start a thread of whatever topic you want to talk about, or there's a TECH1002 thread there already. Just reply to that. You can tag myself or John into a message if you see us on there as well. So it'd be great to get some in-depth, passionate conversations about music and about culture and about media and about arts going on there, just to tell us what it is that you're into and why you're into it. So I'll see you at the lecture on Tuesday.